My sister's daughter dumped my son's new Apple Vision Pro into the fish tank and laughed, "Now the loser can watch fish in 3D. I didn't react. That night, my sister texted, "Your kid can cry somewhere else. Stay away from us." I replied, "Cool, I'll take my name off the car loan tomorrow." By morning, 36 missed calls lit up my phone. Callum had been carrying the box for 2 months before he could afford what went inside it. White cardboard, Apple logo, the outline of the Vision Pro printed on the front. He kept it on his desk next to his homework lamp and his library books, and he looked at it every night before bed the way some kids look at posters of athletes or musicians. He was 14. He had mowed lawns for 2 summers, stocked shelves at the hardware store on Saturdays, and saved every dollar from 3 birthdays. The total came to $3,499. He counted it twice at the kitchen table, organized by denomination, and then he asked me to drive him to the Apple store. He bought it with cash. The associate behind the counter looked at me, and I shook my head and pointed at Callum. His money. Callum handed over a bank envelope with the bills inside, and the associate counted them and handed him the device, and Callum held it the way people hold things they earned. Careful, both hands. Like the weight meant something beyond the object. He taped the receipt inside the lid. He told me that was so he could always remember what the money felt like before it became a thing. 3 days before the cookout, Callum sat on his bed with the Vision Pro and a notebook. He was writing down which apps to show Dex: the dinosaur experience, the underwater footage, the solar system walkthrough. He asked me if Grandpa would like the one where you stand on the surface of Mars and look at the horizon. I told him Dex would love it. Callum added it to the list and underlined it twice. The following Saturday, my parents hosted a family cookout at their house. Dex in Simone's backyard, folding table, burgers, the usual. My sister Zoe was there with her husband Rhett and their daughter Juno, who was 12, and had the social confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone she was related to. Callum brought the Vision Pro because Dex had asked to see it on the phone. "Bring that headset thing. I want to try the dinosaur app." Callum smiled when he heard that. He does not smile at school. He does not smile at most family gatherings. He smiled because his grandfather wanted to see something he owned. Callum was showing Dex the headset in the living room when Juno walked over. She had been on the couch scrolling her phone for 20 minutes, bored and looking for a target the way bored kids with no boundaries look for targets. She watched Callum adjust the headset on Dex's face. She watched Dex laugh at whatever was on the screen. Then she walked to Callum, took the Vision Pro off the side table where he had set it down, crossed the room in 4 steps, and dropped it into the 75-gallon fish tank that sat against the far wall. The device hit the water and sank to the gravel. Juno looked at Callum and said, "Now the loser can watch fish in 3D. The room had 6 people in it. Dex, Simone, Zoe, Rhett on the couch, me in the kitchen doorway, and Callum, who stood perfectly still with his hands at his sides and watched everything he had saved for settle to the bottom of a tank next to a ceramic castle and a plastic diver. Nobody moved for 4 seconds. Then Simone said, "It was an accident, Petra. It was not." Juno had walked 8 feet across a room, picked up the device, carried it to the tank, held it over the water, and let go. Simone was sitting 3 feet away and watched every step. Zoe was leaning against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed and a half smile she was trying to flatten into concern. She did not correct Juno. She did not move toward the tank. She uncrossed one arm and waved her hand. "Oh, relax, Petra. It's a gadget. Your kid acts like you handed him a kidney. Maybe if you raised him to toughen up instead of crying over electronics, he would not be the kid who sits alone at lunch." She said it in front of Dex, who looked at the floor, in front of Simone, who pressed her lips together, in front of Rhett, who shifted on the couch and pulled out his phone, in front of Callum, who heard his aunt tell a room of adults that he eats lunch by himself and that his mother made him that way. I walked to the tank. reached in and pulled the Vision Pro out. Dead, screen black, water running from every port. I set it on the table, photographed it next to the tank, and turned to Callum. "Get your jacket. We're leaving." Callum picked up his jacket from the chair. He walked past Dex, who opened his mouth and closed it without producing a word, and followed me out the front door. The drive home was silent. Callum sat in the passenger seat holding the ruined headset in his lap. Halfway home, he said, "She was watching. Aunt Zoe saw her pick it up." "I know." "She did not say anything." "I know." "Why do we go there, Mom? We will not be going back." We pulled into the driveway. Callum went to his room. He closed the lid on the packaging and went to bed. That night at 11:14 p.m., Zoe texted me. One message: "Your kid can cry somewhere else. Stay away from us." I read it twice. I almost typed "she did it on purpose, and you know it." I almost started the argument Zoe was looking for. But the packaging was on Callum's desk with a dead headset inside, and that mattered more than any text thread at 11 at night. I typed 7 words. "Cool, I'll take my name off the car loan tomorrow." I pressed send, turned off the screen, went to bed. By 6 the next morning, 36 missed calls lit up my phone. 14 from Zoe, 11 from Rhett, 6 from Simone, 5 from Dex. I listened to one voicemail, Zoe's, left at 2:47 a.m. "Petra, you cannot do this. You know what that loan means. You know Rhett's credit. Call me back. This is not a joke." I cleared every notification and made coffee. If you are new here, welcome to Family Secret Tales. What I am about to tell you is how 7 words caused those calls and why every one went unanswered. My ex-husband and I separated when Callum was 10. He moved to Denver. Callum stayed with me. The first 6 months were the hardest. I had been working part-time at a used car lot doing paperwork while the marriage was falling apart, and when it ended I needed full-time income and benefits within 30 days. Hartwell Dealership Group had an opening for a financing coordinator. The interview was on a Tuesday. I wore the only blazer I owned, and I answered every question about loan structures and lender requirements from memory. Because I had been reading the paperwork at the used car lot for 2 years, and I understood the architecture of debt the way some people understand grammar. They hired me the same week. 6 years later, I am still there. Every morning I make Callum breakfast, drive him to school, and drive to a desk where I spend 8 hours deciding whether strangers can afford the cars they want. I am good at the math. The math does not lie, and in a family where everyone lies about money, that skill became the thing that kept me standing. 2 years ago, Zoe and Rhett wanted a new SUV. Chevy Traverse, $34,800 after negotiation. Rhett's credit was around 590. No lender would approve him as the lead on that balance. Zoe's credit was better, but not enough to carry it alone. Zoe called me on a Wednesday evening crying. She said Juno needed a safer car. She said they just needed someone with a clean credit profile on the loan and they would make every payment themselves. Temporary, I agreed. I became the primary obligor. The lender required a lead borrower with a score above 720. That was me. Rhett was listed as secondary. The loan, the payment obligation, everything ran through my name first. I remember the day I signed. Rhett was sitting across from the finance manager at a dealership in Clearwater, tapping his knee under the table while the manager explained the terms. Zoe was in the hallway holding Juno's hand. I was in the third chair with a pen and a stack of disclosures. The finance manager looked at me once and said, "You understand that as primary if the secondary defaults. The full obligation falls to you." I said yes. Rhett said, "That is never going to happen." The finance manager did not respond to that. He slid the next page across the desk and pointed to the signature line. I signed it. The whole process took 40 minutes. Rhett shook my hand in the parking lot and said, "I owe you one." He never mentioned it again. Zoe and Rhett would deposit $610 into a joint account every month. Autopay would pull from that account. 60 months. Their money, my signature. For 20 months, the deposits were on time. Then 4 months ago, the deposits started coming in 150 short. Every month. I covered the gap from my own checking because asking about it felt harder than paying. $600 of my money over 4 months. Their car. My neighbor Bracken is 52, retired firefighter. He watches Callum when I have late shifts. The Sunday morning after the calls, he was in his driveway. He looked at my face and said, "Bad night?" 36 calls between midnight and 6. About what? The car loan. He nodded. "You finally said something?" 1 sentence. By text. He picked up his garden hose and turned toward his yard. Over his shoulder, he said, "Good inside." I opened the joint account on my laptop. The deposit records confirmed what I already knew. Then I pulled my personal checking and ran the math. 4 transfers of $150. $600 from my account into theirs, spread across 4 months, timed within 24 hours of each short deposit. The autopay never missed because I was the safety net they never asked permission to use. Then I remembered something. 6 weeks earlier, my colleague Nadira at Hartwell had mentioned a customer who called asking whether a secondary name on a loan could remove the lead name from a vehicle without consent. Nadira told him no. I had not connected it at the time. Now I pulled up the inquiry log. The caller was Rhett. The account was mine. He had asked whether the SUV could be reissued in his name while leaving me on the remaining balance. He wanted the car and the debt left with me. The answer was no. But the fact that he had tried told me the arrangement was never temporary. I wrote a letter to the lender, 3 paragraphs, payment shortfalls, unsustainable arrangement. 90 days for the secondary to refinance, or I would request a voluntary surrender. I mailed it Monday morning. Certified, that afternoon I picked Callum up from school and drove to the Apple store. He did not know where we were going until I pulled into the lot. "Mom, you do not have to do this, I know. It was a lot of money. It was. And it was yours. And what happened to it was not your fault." He sat with that for a moment. "Juno is not going to say sorry. I already know that. This is not about Juno. This is about you having what you worked for." We walked in. I paid cash. Different associate, same device. Callum held it the same way. When we got home, he taped the new purchase date inside the lid in the same spot, in his careful block letters. Thursday, the lender's review notice arrived at Zoe and Rhett's address. Zoe called 4 times in 40 minutes. I did not answer. Saturday, 8 days after the cookout, Zoe's car pulled into my driveway, Rhett in the passenger seat, Simone in the back. The neighbor's sprinkler was ticking in slow circles across the street. Zoe knocked. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Callum was in his room. Zoe started before her foot left the step. "The letter from the lender is a mistake. We have been paying every month." I went inside, came back with the printed account summary, held it up. The 4 highlighted lines spoke for themselves. Zoe turned to Rhett. "What is she talking about?" Rhett's eyes went to the page and then to his shoes. I was going to make it up. "Things were tight. Tight enough that you did this for 4 months and never told me?" They turned on each other. I gave them 15 seconds. The sprinkler ticked through 2 full arcs. Then I held up the second page, the Hartwell log with Rhett's name, and the question he had asked about separating ownership from obligation. The blood left his face. "You wanted the car and the debt left with me," I said, "while depositing less than you owed." Simone stepped forward from her car. She was wearing sunglasses she did not need because the porch was in shade. "Petra, this is getting out of hand." Out of hand was watching from 3 feet away and calling it something it was not, Mom. Simone pulled the sunglasses off and held them in both hands like she needed something to grip. Rhett dropped his voice low. "What if I cover everything tonight? The gap, the headset, all of it. You were standing on my porch offering to pay things you already owed me. That is not a solution. That is a late invoice. Then what do you want? The car exists because I signed for it. Juno's soccer practice is not funded by Rhett's credit. It is funded by mine. Zoe shifted registers. Petra, we are sisters. You would take transportation from a child over this? Your husband tried to take the car and leave me with the debt. That was not sisterhood either. Zoe's arms dropped to her sides. She looked at Simone. Simone looked at the porch railing. Nobody in that driveway had a response that did not require admitting something they had all agreed to pretend had not happened. Simone stepped onto the porch. Your father and I can mediate. Mediation was available the day it happened. Nobody took it. I reached behind the screen door and picked up the empty Vision Pro packaging, set it on the porch railing. Placed the replacement cost on top. That is what it cost. I expect reimbursement within 60 days. If I do not receive it, I will file in small claims court. Zoe stared at the paper. Rhett stared at the ground. Simone pressed her sunglasses against her collarbone. You have 90 days to get this vehicle into your own name. If you do not, I will surrender it to the lender with the documentation to prove why, and tell Juno that what she broke took a boy 2 years to earn. Rhett's hand came up to his jaw. He rubbed it, looked at Zoe, and she did not look back. He turned and walked to the SUV. Zoe followed. Simone followed. The engine started, and the car pulled out without Rhett adjusting his mirrors. The street went empty. The sprinkler was the only thing still moving. I went inside and locked the door. That evening, my phone rang. A number I did not recognize. A woman named Carol, the mother of one of the children at the cookout. She had been in the kitchen and watched the incident through the doorway. I want you to know that I saw everything, Carol said. My son has not stopped talking about it. He keeps saying nobody did anything. Thank you for calling. Your boy, is he okay? He will be. The girl walked across the room and held it over the tank. That was not an accident. That was a choice. And what your sister said afterward was worse than what the girl did. Carol had an 8-year-old who played on the same soccer league as Juno. She told me she had already spoken to the league coordinator about the incident because she did not want her son attending events where Juno's behavior was excused by adults who should know better. The coordinator asked for details. Carol gave them. 2 other parents from the cookout contacted the coordinator separately that week. The coordinator called Zoe and asked about the incident. Zoe said it had been dealt with privately. The coordinator said 3 families had raised concerns and that the league expected all players to demonstrate character standards both on and off the field. Zoe hung up. If you need a written statement for anything, I will provide one, Carol said to me. What I saw was deliberate. I saved Carol's number. The following week, Dex came to my house, not for the dinner, that came later. He came on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced. He sat at my kitchen table, and I placed the account summary and the Hartwell inquiry log in front of him. He read both pages twice. He took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. How long has the payment been short? 4 months. And you covered it. Every time. Why did you not tell me? Because the last time something broke in your house, you walked to the kitchen. He flinched, not visibly, but I saw his hands press against the table like the surface had shifted underneath him. The inquiry, he said. Rhett called your dealership. He wanted the car without the obligation. He could not do it without a refinance, but he asked. Dex looked at the wall behind me. His jaw was tight. Your mother told me you were overreacting about a gadget. Mom was in the room. I know. He picked up his glasses and stood up. I will talk to your mother. I will talk to Zoe. I do not know if it will change anything, but I will say it. He left. He did not hug me at the door. He was not there yet, but the fact that he drove to my house, sat at my table, and read the pages without defending anyone was the beginning of something. That conversation was the foundation for what happened at the birthday dinner 2 weeks later. 3 days later, Simone called crying. Zoe was falling apart. Rhett was on the couch. Juno was asking why everyone was angry. You are tearing this family apart over a piece of electronics. It is not about electronics, Mom. Then what is it about? Because from where I sit, my 2 daughters are not speaking. My granddaughter is eating lunch alone at school, and my son-in-law is sleeping on his own couch. Over $600 Rhett took from me. Over a call to my dealership where he tried to take the car, over a text from Zoe telling me my son can cry somewhere else, and over you watching the whole thing and telling me it was something it was not. Simone was quiet for several seconds. Then she said, I did what I thought was right in the moment. The moment lasted 8 feet, Mom. She walked 8 feet across a room. You had time. Simone took a breath. Your father wants to talk to you. Dad can call me himself. He is afraid you will not answer. Then he knows how it feels. I emailed her the documents with one line at the bottom. This is not about the Vision Pro. Then I put the phone down. 2 days later, Rhett and Zoe applied to refinance at a credit union. Rhett's credit was 591. The minimum was 620. The loan officer, a young man in a blue tie who looked uncomfortable delivering the news, explained that without a qualifying cosigner, the institution could not approve the application. Zoe, who had been sitting in the chair beside Rhett with her purse in her lap and her coat still on, said, What if I apply as primary? The officer ran her numbers. Zoe's score was 648, but her debt-to-income ratio was too high with the mortgage and 2 credit cards. I am sorry, the officer said. You would need to reduce existing obligations or find a qualified co-signer. They walked out to the parking lot. Zoe got in the passenger side and closed the door. Rhett stood outside with his hand on the roof for a few seconds, looking at the credit union sign. Then he got in and they sat there without starting the engine. The SUV they were sitting in belonged to a loan that someone else had qualified for, and that someone else had just given them 90 days to find a replacement or lose the vehicle. The parking lot was quiet. The rejection letter would arrive by mail in 3 to 5 business days. They called Simone. Simone said she could not take on a car payment. They called Rhett's brother in Tulsa. He said no. They called a friend from the gym. He did not call back. I almost answered when Zoe called that afternoon. Her voicemail said, We got rejected. We cannot do this without you. But the voicemail did not contain the word sorry. It contained the word cannot. That was the difference between a sister asking for help and a borrower reporting a failed application. I deleted it. That evening, Rhett told Zoe where the missing money had been going, a fishing boat deposit at a marina south of town. Zoe was standing at the kitchen counter when he said it. She set down the glass she was holding and looked at him. A boat. It was supposed to be a surprise. For the family. A surprise. While my sister covered your car payments, it was only $150 a month. I was going to pay it back. You were going to pay back the woman whose son's headset your daughter just destroyed. With what? Rhett did not have an answer. He reached for the counter and Zoe stepped away. Not dramatically, just enough that his hand landed on empty granite. She picked up her phone and walked to the bedroom and closed the door. They argued for 3 days, the quiet kind where dinner happens in separate rooms. Juno asked why Rhett was on the couch. Zoe said, Ask your father. Juno did not ask. Zoe canceled the boat deposit, recovered half, and put $300 toward the Vision Pro reimbursement. On day 58 of the 60-day window, a check arrived. Full amount. No note. On day 61, I drove to the county courthouse anyway. The small claims paperwork was filled out and sitting in a folder on the passenger seat. Filing fee was $41. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, confirmed the deposit had cleared on my phone, and drove home. I kept the paperwork in the filing cabinet. The check had arrived, but the folder stayed ready. I put the reimbursement into Callum's college savings account at the branch on Elm Street. The teller asked if the deposit was for a specific goal. I said college. She said, "Smart mom." I did not tell her where the money came from. The following week, Callum came home from school and said a kid in his class named Marco had asked to see the headset. Callum had said maybe. 2 days later, Marco came over after school. He sat on Callum's bedroom floor and Callum showed him the underwater app. Marco said, "This is insane." Callum said, "Wait until you see the jellyfish." They spent an hour passing the headset back and forth, taking turns narrating what they saw on the screen. When Marco's mom picked him up, Marco said, "Can I come back Thursday?" Callum looked at me. I said yes. Marco came back Thursday. And the following week. By October, Callum had a standing Thursday appointment that he never called a playdate because 14-year-olds do not use that word. But that is what it was. The headset that Juno had tried to ruin had become the thing that opened a door Callum had kept closed for years. At Juno's school, things moved differently. 2 of the children from the cookout attended the same middle school. One of them told a friend what Juno had done. By the second week, 3 kids had asked Juno about it directly. She denied it at first. Then a girl in her social studies class said, "My mom was there. She saw you do it." Juno stopped denying and started avoiding. She ate lunch in the library for 2 weeks. Zoe called the school counselor and said Juno was being targeted by classmates. The counselor, a woman named Mrs. Whitfield, asked Zoe to describe the situation. Zoe said Juno was being accused of something that was blown out of proportion. Mrs. Whitfield asked what the accusation was. Zoe described the headset incident in a version that included the words horseplay and misunderstanding. Mrs. Whitfield asked whether the headset was destroyed. Zoe said yes. Mrs. Whitfield asked whether reimbursement had been made. Zoe said that was a family matter. Mrs. Whitfield said, "The students are responding to an action your daughter took. That is not bullying. That is social consequence. I can offer Juno a mediation session with the students involved, but I cannot intervene to suppress their response to something she did." Zoe hung up and called Rhett. Rhett said, maybe she should write the apology letter. Zoe said, she does not owe anyone an apology for horseplay. Rhett said, it was not horseplay, Zoe. She picked it up and dropped it in. I was in the room. That was the first time Rhett had contradicted Zoe's version of the incident out loud. Zoe did not respond. The apology letter was never written. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Dex turned 64. Simone organized a dinner at a steakhouse. I was not going until Dex called me directly. I read the documents you sent your mother. She told me it was about the headset. It was not. No. Will you come to dinner? I almost said no. I almost told him that the man who walked to the kitchen while his granddaughter's headset sank to the bottom of a tank had forfeited the right to arrange family dinners. But his voice sounded different from the calls that first morning. There was no damage control in it. There was just a father asking his daughter to sit at a table. Zoe does not want me there. I am not asking Zoe. I am asking you. I went. Callum stayed with Bracken. The restaurant had a private section in the back with 3 tables pushed together. Dex and Simone were already seated. Zoe arrived with Rhett and a friend named Tess, who clearly did not know what she had walked into. Juno was not there. Dinner was quiet for 30 minutes. Bread, salads, small talk. Zoe had not looked at me once. Rhett was cutting his steak with more force than the meat required. Then Rhett tried. So, the loan situation. I have been making the full deposits since the letter. We are current. Dex set his fork down. He looked at his plate and then lifted his head and spoke to the table. You went behind her back on payments and on the paperwork. My granddaughter deliberately destroyed something Callum earned himself, and my daughter told Petra her kid could cry somewhere else. That is not a loan situation, Rhett. That is a pattern. The table went silent. Tess looked at Zoe. The server stepped back toward the bar. I watched Juno walk across that room. Dex continued. I watched her pick it up and drop it in. I watched Simone call it something it was not. I said nothing. That was my failure. I am not saying nothing now. Zoe spoke for the first time since the food arrived. Her voice was tight and controlled. Dad, this is not the place. There was a place. It was your mother's living room 8 weeks ago. Nobody used it. Zoe set her napkin on the table. She looked at Rhett. Rhett was staring at the breadbasket like it contained instructions. Tess leaned toward Zoe and whispered something. Zoe shook her head. Tess picked up her purse, excused herself to the bathroom, and did not come back for 10 minutes. When she returned, she sat at the far end of the table and did not speak for the rest of the meal. Simone had been holding her water glass for over a minute without lifting it. She set it down carefully and said, "Can we please talk about your father's birthday?" Nobody answered. The server approached, asked about dessert, and retreated when nobody responded. The check came. Dex paid. Nobody argued over the bill. I left before coffee. Hugged Dex at the door. He held on an extra second. I should have said it sooner. If you are still listening, take a second and subscribe to Family Secret Tales. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done at that front desk. The following Sunday, Dex drove to my house without calling first. He knocked, and when I opened the door, he said, "Is Callum home?" Callum was at the kitchen table doing homework. Dex walked in and sat across from him. "I owe you an apology. You brought that headset to show me because I asked you to. And when Juno broke it, I walked to the kitchen. I should have stayed. I should have said something." Callum looked at Dex for a few seconds. Then he said, "Did you see the Mars app before she took it?" Dex blinked. "I saw the dinosaurs. I did not get to Mars. It is the best one. You stand on the surface and the horizon is orange." Dex's chin trembled slightly. He pressed his lips together and nodded. "Show me sometime?" Okay. Dex stayed for 20 minutes. He drank a glass of water and watched Callum do math problems, and then he left. At the door he said to me, "He is a good kid, Petra. You raised him right." It was the first time my father had said that sentence to me. I closed the door and stood there for a moment. When I got back to the kitchen, Callum was still doing homework. Without looking up, he said, "Grandpa looked sad." He was. Is he going to be okay? That depends on him. Callum went back to his math. He had already moved on. Children do that when adults finally say the thing they should have said weeks ago. They absorb it and keep working. The apology does not erase the damage, but it tells the child that the damage was real and that someone other than their parents saw it. The 90-day deadline arrived on a Tuesday in November. Rhett had spent the previous weeks calling every person he could think of. His brother said no for the second time. 2 coworkers said they would think about it and never called back. A college friend he had not spoken to in 4 years listened for 2 minutes and said, "I do not co-sign for anyone." On day 86, a coworker named Phil agreed. Phil was a foreman at the construction firm where Rhett worked in estimating. He had clean credit, and he had known Rhett for 3 years. He agreed to meet at a smaller credit union that accepted scores above 580 with a qualified co-signer. Phil met Rhett at the credit union on day 88. The loan officer ran the numbers. Because of Rhett's history, the interest rate jumped from 4.9% to 8.7%. The monthly payment went from $610 to $740. Phil read every page of the co-signer agreement. He asked the loan officer 2 questions. What happens if a payment is missed? The co-signer is contacted and responsible for the balance. What happens if 2 are missed? Collection proceedings begin against both parties. Phil set the pen on the page and looked at Rhett. "I am doing this once. 1 miss, and I will not call you to ask why. I will call a lawyer." Rhett signed. The credit union processed the documents. On day 89, I received the lender's confirmation that my obligation had been discharged. I read the letter at my kitchen table. For 26 months, my credit score had been attached to a vehicle I did not drive, payments I supplemented without being asked, and a man who tried to take my name off the paperwork while keeping my money. That was over. Rhett's payment had jumped $130 a month. The fishing boat deposit was gone. The SUV was now in his name, on his credit, at a rate that reflected exactly what his financial history was worth. 2 weeks after the refinance closed, Rhett missed the first payment. The auto pay had been linked to the old joint account. Phil's phone call came at 7 a.m. Phil did not yell. His voice was flat and professional. Payment bounced. The credit union flagged both of us. I need this resolved by end of business today. Rhett paid by phone at noon. The late fee was $35. He set up new auto pay that afternoon and triple-checked the account number. Phil did not call again. He did not need to. The difference between Phil and me was simple. Phil had conditions. Phil had consequences. Phil was not family. And for the first time in 26 months, Rhett was paying for a car under the rules that apply to every other adult: miss a payment, lose the car, ruin the cosigner, face collection. The safety net I had been holding under him for over 2 years was folded and stored in my filing cabinet, and nothing in the world was going to make me unfold it. I put the discharge letter in a folder in the filing cabinet. Then I closed the cabinet and made dinner. On a Saturday morning in early December, Callum and I were at the kitchen table. Marco had come over the day before, and they had spent 2 hours on the headset, taking turns narrating deep ocean footage and arguing about whether anglerfish were scarier than goblin sharks. Callum was wearing the Vision Pro now, alone, watching something about bioluminescence. He was narrating what he saw. There are organisms at that depth that produce their own light. They do not need the sun. They just glow. He took off the headset and looked at me. "Can we go to an aquarium sometime?" I said yes. He put the headset back on and went back to the ocean. Inside the lid, beneath the printed store receipt, he had written the new purchase date in careful block letters. Different date than the first one, same handwriting. Thank you for listening to Family Secret Tales. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me what those calls sounded like from the other side.